My first one I call AI Dev Sizer.
My second idea is linked to your dev idea as well.
This I call the Mastermind for Jobseekers. So I got this idea after watching Lenny's podcast a couple weeks ago.
My last idea is called Service Mail. And I got this idea last week when I was talking to one of our heads of customer service at an e-com company that we have. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the $1 Million Ideas podcast. Today, we have my friend Ken Lever on the podcast with me, and we're going to go through the same sequence, which is we're going to talk about 4 independent ideas, really try to dissect them, try to see how to get them to $1 million. And then hopefully, if you like any of these, you can leave a comment below. And if you want to work together on any of these, I hope that you will DM us. Given that this is when we started off, we wanted to do 10 of these episodes and get feedback from a lot of people as to how useful they found them. And also for us to get useful with this format of recording. So if you leave a comment or anything below, that would really help us a lot. And with that, hi Ken, how's it going? How's the week been so far?
Good. Getting ready to take a week in Japan. So just trying to front load and get as much done as I can.
It's always good. Do you take sporadic sort of trips, or was this something that you planned many months ago and you're like, okay, we're going to Japan in October and stuff like that?
No, my wife is an expert in vacation. That is literally, I think, all she thinks about in her free time. So I try to minimize my wife's plans and I make no plans of my own because I know all I got to do is let her loose. She'll plan a lot of vacation.
Well, that's pretty cool, right? Where do you lie on the whole thing? You've got to collect experiences in your life. I think you've traveled and you've done a lot of stuff. Maybe your wife hasn't, but I guess it's a tug and pull. How do you see that?
Yeah, I would say I front loaded all that. I was, I think in my 20s until my mid 30s, I traveled to 90 plus countries, lived in 12, done everything I wanted to do in my life in terms of that. And now I'm very laser focused on, okay, time to.
When I think about it, it just makes so much sense, but society is structured the other way. In your 20s, 30s, you're supposed to bust your ass, hustle, work up, save money for your house, get married, have kids, and then, save enough money. And at 60, you can go to 90 countries. Yeah,
I think, and I understand why society does that. And it's probably the right thing to do because your health degrades. And so you have less energy, less ambition, all this. Luckily, I figured out how to reverse all that. So therefore, it's okay.
No, let's do that. Your health degrades. So then if your health degrades and we die a little every year, as Brian Johnson says, then why does it make sense? Because then you won't see the rest of the world when you're 60 and you have to go to 90 countries then.
Well, I think if you front load all the hard work and the risk to your early 20s, then hopefully it doesn't take you 20, 30 years to achieve the success you want. Rather, hopefully you front load it and really achieve it in the first decade. And you still have your late 30s and 40s to just take it easier.
Would you swap places with someone? Would you go back and change stuff? From your perspective, when you are 20 and 30 and you're backpacking and you're going through all of this and you're just sort of experiencing it fully versus say you achieve a bunch of stuff and then you stay at fancy hotels and you say all of these things. I think the experiences of those two people will be very different.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say I was wired differently back then. So it's not that I thought I was chilling out. I was doing the corporate thing and working very hard, but also playing very hard. But I hadn't really clued into this whole game of creating your own businesses and stuff. So there wasn't a reason to go above and beyond a certain point. The way I was wired.
I'm thinking about this a lot these days, which is we all are playing this game of life. And like you said, there's there's no right or wrong way. You can front load like you did. You can sort of like front load all the work you did and retire a lot earlier. And ultimately, like when you were 20s and 30s, like you said, like you were working a corporate job, like one of the things that even perhaps the audience might be looking for is, where did you get your sense of purpose from? Like, was it just like, I want to level up at all of these companies and then that will give me all of this opportunity to keep traveling and things like that? Or what was driving you at that stage?
In that generation, I was Gen X. There was a program that would last pretty much through your whole 20s where it was like, okay, you work in consulting or banking for 3 years or so. You go, you do an MBA at a very good school. You get out, you increase your pay by almost 2x and you're working a more senior role. And then you're trying to make it to a certain level within a certain, and that whole course, which is almost pre-written, takes you until you're in your early 30s. And I was that person. You didn't even like question it, right? It wasn't, I only started questioning a little bit when I read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week, which was so game changing for my generation because it just completely said, hey, like, are you sure you're doing the right thing by, just like doing this blind consulting or banking route?
No, that's fascinating. And I think like you said, like the script was heavily sort of like written like before, like Gen X, early Gen Y. And because it was actually a reliable script, to be honest. Like if you were Gen X late and Gen X early played the same game as you with the same way, they got similar results. Therefore, it became like that Skinner experiment, like, when you press the lever, then you get the thing back. And so you get very programmed to do that because you do that. And then what happened, I think, like in the 80s was that it still was working pretty well and you could press the thing, but there was some sporadic, like someone didn't get it immediately or it took longer. Schools became more competitive as the world globalized. In the 90s, like when I started thinking about like, that generation, Gen Z and then millennials, like today I feel like you don't know, like you go into this box and you press this thing, given that everyone before you had like, let's say a 60% chance of getting the bill. And now I don't even think like it's 60%. I think like it's basically like a casino today. And it's a lot about luck and a lot about these other factors where people are still playing the same script. I still see like, we were talking earlier before the podcast started about Asian parents, which both of us had, like how they push their kids to play this game because they're still living in a world where they saw that with a high degree of success and they want to give that to their children as well.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, I think it was a game that worked pretty consistently. If you wanted to be a multimillionaire, the people that were born even 10 years before me, like it just worked. You became a consultant and either you became a partner or you went into a senior level industry position and you just made more and more money and you had a good life and it was relatively risk free or low risk because there were plenty of positions to do that. And I think my generation is where by the time we hit our late 30s, early 40s, like this was already faltering because of all the layoffs and consulting and banking lost some of its tarnish and it restructured. So all these people that had my wired mindset were now late 30s, early 40s. And they were like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not going to play that game. Like it's not going to work for me. And then they questioned everything.
As part of it, I think one of the reasons why I like this podcast is that this way of thinking now, which is to find an idea that you enjoy doing, have an edge and can consistently sort of like contribute to over a longer period of time, therefore becomes the new box that you create for yourself. Because if you're successful in creating it, you can get the same sort of like results. And the problem is that it's not scripted as to how to get started. And I think like that's what I hope that our podcast eventually will help people with, that there are definitely no prescriptions over here in this podcast. Like if you want to make $1 million ideas, do this. Every week we sort of like bring pretty much 4 unique ideas to the table, and it requires a certain type of person to execute them. So I hope that we can inspire, because I think like if we get even if you one person, 2 people to actually do this, watch this, do a variation of an idea and actually make it, hopefully we've played a little role in getting people to reprogram themselves into this new game that we all have to play.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so important. I think, what folks should understand is when you see me and you're looking at 2 people that have spent several years at least watching hundreds of hours of podcasts of these more or less bootstrapped entrepreneurs and the way they think and the way they, and this mindset is very rare here in Southeast Asia. It's more the VC type thing. And I think people are going to like more and more people are just going to come out of that thinking, oh my God, I've been chasing the wrong thing, and they're going to conclude something closer to what we've concluded. So hopefully we can get there.
It's the same feeling that I would imagine a Gen Xer would feel after achieving partner level at that consulting work, but rather being soulless at the time, because I think like I'm probably generalizing, but I would bet that it would. I'm not saying that every partner is like, oh my God, I hate my job. I think there are a certain amount of partners, which I also know that enjoy their job very much. But I don't think that it's a catch-all. Like this is the path that if you make that level, then, you would have achieved a sense of purpose in your life, because most people retire their partners after 55, 60, and then they have no purpose and we're living longer. And then what do you do? And I don't think that's a question that early Gen Xers ever asked, because the contract was retire at 60 and then go travel 90 countries.
Exactly. And you just see people that did that, and you like your heroes change. I used to, in my early 30s, late 20s, the partners in McKinsey or the VPs in Goldman were my heroes. And now when I see these people, it's not only that they're not my heroes. Like I don't give a shit about them. Like I feel sorry for them. Like that they spent their life in such a useless way. Like I look at my 7 years of consulting as like, okay, I enjoyed working with those people, some very smart people, but I consider most of that shit useless. Like why would you spend so many hours making PowerPoint when you could be building real businesses and like creating value? And those are the things I'm proud of when I think back on my legacy. And there's very little from my consulting days that I think back and I'm like, yeah, I'm proud of that. Like I created a deck, and then half of it they ignored and did something else.
But at least you got the BCG box with your cows, dogs, and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's get started with the idea. So do you want to go first, and we can get through them quicker?
Yeah, sure. My first one I call AI Dev Sizer. So I've been in the tech world as a product person for about 10 years. In Scrum, you have a way of estimating points and coming to a velocity for the team and for people. And this is a very established way of doing things. Now I work a lot with these freelancer developers and sometimes with no-code developers like Bubble. And I find the same challenge in that you put together a group of people, there are different levels, and you need to figure out, some of them want to get paid a bit more, paid a bit less. And it's hard to estimate the amount of effort involved in some of these tasks that you're giving them, right? So you could, and it takes a lot of time to estimate things, and it's often not accurate. So I've wanted this many times where AI, which, it's getting good at coding, so it should be able to take this task, which you've written out, and figure out, all right, is this 7 points or 9 points or 2 points? And then you can just use that to pay people equitably rather than just assuming that someone's more experienced or something like that. So my idea is creating this AI estimator that dev teams can use. And then they write out tasks and it basically comes up with a rough estimate. And then after they implement that task and they're updating the ticket, like the estimator can say, oh, actually, I said this was 7, but actually I think now it's 9 because you did a bunch of, something like this. Yeah.
And it's like an impartial sort of like thing as well, right? Like, because what happens in engineering teams, as both of us know, is that scope creep does happen, but then people underestimate as well. And they're like, shit, this turned out to be a lot harder or bigger than I thought it was.
Yeah, exactly. And so you'd need to estimate, you'd need to update the ticket somehow when scope creep happens. So that would be part of, taken into account.
Yeah, I mean, I face the same problem. And it's one of those wicked type problems where the space is always moving. And the analogy I like over here is the map is not the territory sort of like thing over here, where we have this map of what we want to build and you get into the nuts and bolts of it. And suddenly, this dependency, that dependency comes in. Someone who can actually do that, because I think the key part that you said was that now AI can code. So I think like even right now, if we gave AI the whole thing, let's say in 6 months, right? So Sam Altman thinks that we have full-on autonomous agents 2025, and that's basically going to change everything. But I would assume that development agents are still going to be rough on the edges in the first iterations. But even those guys, like if they get out and they say like, okay, completion time, if you give me this task is X, then even the estimator could use that and like maybe put a buffer and a slider scale as to how risk averse or how much you want to push is, and then multiply that by a certain thing, and then you would get your points. Because the whole deal is, will I want, like if I'm building a fintech app, which is logic around the wallet, will I want Cursor to write that? Probably not. But if I tell Cursor, write this, and Cursor said, okay, I'll finish all of this in like, I don't know, like 2 hours, then some multiplier, whether that be 5, 10, 15, maybe a function of your developer as well, because humans will never write that fast. But if they can use that base, I think that'll be a really helpful tool. And then you can plug it into Jira and then sell it back to Jira.
And I think there's a couple elements to this problem. One is estimating how long it's going to take them. I'm not yet asking them to do that, because that I use these freelance engineers, and how long it takes them to do it also is a function of, are they full-time or they're just spending a couple hours a day or whatever. So the only problem I need to solve is how much to pay them in an equitable, consistent way. And say I have a team of 4 people, and it's okay if this thing is wrong. It just needs to be consistently wrong, right? Like it needs to be wrong on the same way for everybody, and therefore it's fair, right? But what happens in these teams typically when people estimate themselves is you have certain people that just think that they're doing more work and they're going to estimate everything high, and someone who's more humble or something is going to estimate everything low. So that is something I think can easily be corrected for.
I would definitely use it in my teams. And yeah, how do you think like you monetize it though? Like, is it just a subscription service that you subscribe to?
I would maybe do points. I like these points-based systems where you're just buying credits. Like a lot of AI companies work on this credit system now. That way it's a very low ticket to start, and then once everyone likes it, they're actually using quite a bit of points, and at that point you're already part of their process and they're okay paying you.
Yeah, for sure. I think the move away from subscriptions is becoming stronger and stronger, because if SaaS is truly dead in a couple of years where everyone can build their own SaaS, like it gives a lot to think about.
I was just going to say, I think the model that is best, you think about the typical SaaS model, it's almost built around, hey, I want to get paid. And a lot of where I'm going to make money is when somebody just forgets to, sign or cancel, or they're not using it much, but they're paying for a higher subscription. And so those are the biggest value buckets. And I just think the incentives are misaligned on SaaS. Rather, if you tie it to usage, then you're really focused on driving value and not these tricks. So,
yeah. I think moving on, my second idea is linked to your dev idea as well. I think it was 2 weeks ago, I saw Rippling, which is this catch-all HR plus finance, payroll, everything software, released something which they were calling Talent Signal. And I liked it very much. Unfortunately, it was fully embedded in the Rippling software that you had to sign up for to get access to. And that didn't seem like a smart idea. And so today my idea is called EngineerLens. And this is what it does. So with an engineer which joins, let's say that even if we use the AI dev sizer and it says like, this task is 9 points and stuff like that. And the person sort of like gets it done far more inefficiently. So basically at the end of, let's say that we hire a brand new engineer today on the 1st of October, 90 days later, which is 1st of January, we want to review their performance. Ken, like, how would you, like, in the days that you would hire people full time, like, how would you review performance of an engineer after 90 days?
So I think I should qualify with, I never really reviewed engineers because I was a product guy. So
yeah, let's sort of like skip to like, how would you review a product manager after 90 days?
I think if we go back to larger companies like Lazada, Wayfair, they use these HR systems, and a lot of it, like I think in both those companies at some point they had these goals. So it's basically like they would write their goals for the quarter, for the half year, whatever, and then they would write their write-up on how they did, and I would evaluate based on here's what they said they were going to do, and this is what I think was achieved.
And I think like there's always this, like you said, for even an engineer, there would be like, here's the work that we give. And then through an arbitrary sort of like thing, depending on how vocal the engineer was, how active he was in Jira tickets or stuff like that, you add this bias that builds in, especially if near December, the person is far more active and October, November, they weren't that active, that you would still, because of the recency bias, sort of like remember their performance and rate them higher. Anyway, so EngineerLens, this is what it does. Engineer starts on day one. You sort of like connect EngineerLens to your GitHub repo. And it's sort of like now we'll review all the code that this person is going to commit over the 90-day period over there. You will also tell EngineerLens this person is joining as a front-end engineer, a level 3. So I'm assuming that the companies that would buy this would be mid-sized to large-sized companies that, are onboarding a lot more developers onto their side and, don't necessarily know. So you would benchmark someone whose code that they would also read, and they would perhaps read or look at the thoughts of the CTO's code and what he believes or she believes is good code. And at the end of the 90-day period, there would be this signal that it would send out to the HR leadership and anyone saying like, here's what I believe the person's strengths are, weaknesses are. It's not only on throughput, but basically how much impact they had on the code base and stuff like that. And I saw this. This is exactly what Talent Signal does, not only for engineers, but customer service and a whole bunch of things. And the awesome part is that the LLM is now reviewing every single line of code, every single recommit, comment, blah, 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 and then giving you a very descriptive decision at the end of 90 days, which you can use in a conversation. And I would charge per engineer per cycle over here. And we could charge as low as like $300, $100 a month, basically, for that. We would need to do a lot of engineers to get through this. So if you want to make $1 million, we would need to do 3,300 engineers through the process. But I think like it's asymmetric, the value that we're providing, because at $300, even if you're using an offshore engineer at $1,500, $2,000 a month, that was $6,000 committed that you've done, and you have to figure out whether you want to pay them again. Let's say it's $2,000. Yeah, I think like that's the idea.
I think it's great. I think a lot of people are thinking about doing this kind of stuff. So that would be the thing I would be, who are you competing against and trying to crack that one? Because I think you're going up against some deep pocketed tech companies. Yeah, and I think you mentioned Kipling, which is already like multi-unicorn, right? Rippling, right? Yeah, the founder is Conrad or something, right? He's like pretty.
Yeah, he's a Zenefits guy with a very colorful story on the thing. But you're right. The way I would think about the USB and positioning of this is right now, this tool currently is embedded in Rippling itself. So you can't access the tool directly. But I would imagine co-pilots or other people who GitHub, for example, could sort of like try to do this because it already has access to your code. But, again, like this is the key spot. So one of the things that I was thinking was that perhaps you could run the LLM on your code locally versus running on our side. Because I think the biggest thing when I shared it with some engineer friends of mine was like code safety. So I think there's some versions of this that could do this. And I think it'll come down to pricing, how to do this. I've seen a lot of people do this across the board. I would just purely focus on engineers right now. And that would be my thing. So if you run a engineering team of 20 to 100 people, which is already a pretty substantial team, and onboarding 5 to 7 engineers a year, that means, if you use our service, I would make $2,000 off you, and I need 500 clients basically to make $1 million.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I think for sure this stuff is going to get done. I think it's only a matter of like, are you the right person to do it and how competitive? The other thing I was going to say is I remember watching Sergey Brin on the All In podcast a couple of weeks back, and he was saying how he doesn't think his Google engineers were using AI enough to code. And I think that's the other part of the equation. It's like these, analyzers should also be looking at this code and be like, hey, why did you waste your time on all this? Like AI could have written all of this. So I think like it's not just a function of how good is the code. It's like, should you have even written it? Like what should the human do? And I think that's all going to play a role.
Awesome. All right. Moving quickly on to our third idea.
Yeah. So this I call the mastermind for job seekers. So I got this idea after watching Lenny's podcast a couple of weeks ago. There was someone named Phyl, who's the founder of something called Never Search Alone. What Never Search Alone does is it provides some frameworks for how to job search. I think it's more for tech, but not only tech. Like anyone can join. And then what they do is they place people into these mastermind groups, and you have regular calls with your mastermind group, and you use these frameworks. And it seemed quite helpful because you're helping each other think about how you're competitive and what roles you should apply for and how you should position yourself and how you should network. I think a lot of people out there are unemployed. And I know many friends. Again, I'm not trying to get a job for a while now. I enjoy working for myself, but I have a lot of friends that are, right? And some of them have tried, they're always asking me my inputs. And I can tell that it's a very lonely experience. And it's kind of like a lot of them like feel a little bit of depression and they don't know, it's a very vulnerable state. And so I think the idea of these masterminds is a great idea. And it really gives you a lot of ideas of how to open up your search or how to kind of adjust what you're thinking about. So that part of it, that part of the community building, I love. And I think, this organization is doing well in the US, but like this concept doesn't really exist in Asia. And it's, especially in this job market, it should for sure. So I think there's a first mover advantage in doing this in Asia. And then I think you'd have to dabble on how to monetize. But I think you'd have such an engaged user base that you'll figure it out eventually is how I think about it.
I think it's very useful. I have a friend who runs something called Generalist World. And I knew her. She's very young. And she saw this problem a couple of years ago that generalists were also like, there was, I think the pendulum swings like a lot, like, specialists versus generalists. Should you focus primarily early in your career or not? But anyway, she was pretty gung-ho about like being this generalist, all hands sort of like person. And then she built a community of generalists and a lot of them who were looking for work. And then through that, she has built out a thriving community And then the job board that builds on top of it, which I feel like is where you could monetize, because once you have a certain group of people, so perhaps to niching it down, like she did generalists, you could do it for whatever, like, product managers or, any sort of things. I would start in a vertical specialized sort of like place so that you could easily get them. I know that there's something that you might want to check out in Asia that I think is called APAC Marketers. I think it's run by someone from HubSpot. But I think like many people have tried, but perhaps need more of the model from the US to figure out like how do they run these sessions, how do they add value, and do that. I haven't seen anyone run a very concerted effort in this space. But yeah, the world is changing rapidly and companies are downsizing. So people are going out to figure out both like, how do I find a job and what skills do I need to learn to level up and get the jobs that are out there?
Yeah. And they were talking about some stuff that I found very interesting, whereas you need to down market yourself. So one of the concepts he teaches is, the market is supply demand. In this market, a lot of product people that were, say, directors may need to go for a role that is senior PM. And it has nothing to do with how good you are. And it has everything to do with supply and demand, because a lot of other people are leveling down. And so if you didn't know that, or somebody give you that idea, you might just be sitting there waiting on director roles for like 1 year passes, 2 year passes, and you just don't understand the market. And I think like having some people that are better clued into the market and whatnot is a really good thing.
All right, cool. My last idea is called service mail. And I got this idea last week when I was talking to one of our heads of customer service at an e-com company that we have. And he was talking about being completely inundated with customer emails and things like that. Now, the traditional way how to answer this has been actually through tools like, Zendesk or any of the smart sort of like intercom and things like that, which all have help desk things. And basically, they've been routing. You got to create a ticket goes over there. And now intercom has this thing called Phyl, which is an intelligent way of how to respond to the request again. But this was a person who leads a customer service team. So I think like it's a pretty scaled e-com company. So he probably has something like 8 CS reps below him as well. And he was complaining about, I was just doing a coaching session and he was talking about how his inbox is always exploding. It's not directly related to sometimes the customer, sometimes it is the customer. But he says I open the inbox every single day and it's like anxiety producing, right? And that's where I was like thinking about this idea after the call with him, something called service mail. And so what service mail would do is that it would plug into your email. So naturally it requires high trust over here to do it. But then it would sort of like help you read all your email that is coming in. And as you start the day, instead of having like, oh, I wonder what happened here or there, it would sort of like create a report for you and say, hey, Usman, welcome to the new day. Like, these are the 2 most pressing items. I've prepared responses based on the things, past history and stuff like that. Here are the things for the rest of the team. These are lower things. And I almost feel like instead of this anxiety of opening an inbox and scrolling through it to see like who and what to respond to, and I think Superhuman is getting close to it, but I don't think we'll get to this level. I think this is an overlay that I would build for, and I would call it peace of mind for every customer service lead. It would be expensive in the sense that I would do it as close to like $199, $299 again. These are expensive because this is almost like an executive assistant's job, which a lot of people have that they pay a lot of money for. This is the idea. And I need like 300 of these people, I think, to make $1 million a year. Because this is a daily thing. Like it would solve their problem every single day. So I can get away with charging monthly over here. Yeah, that's my idea, service mail. 300 people to get to $1 million ARR.
So is it mainly for customer service people or for any?
Yeah, I would only do this for customer service people at the start, and 3,000 people, not 300. But yeah, customer service people, because I feel like it would be easier to train and then get the LLM to understand customer service responses and things like that and figure out that structure, it could naturally expand into other people and triaging inboxes. I think like it becomes a lot more harder to triage everyone's inbox. And I think that's when you need like more general intelligence to get through this. This would help us train, and it will also help me market, because I would just market. Are you a stressed out customer service lead who needs help managing their inbox? Well, service mail is for you. And
I think there's something there. I would need to understand this customer service market much better, because I have a very outdated view on how it works. And in the larger organizations that I've seen customer service operating more in the e-commerce side, like the customer service managers and stuff, like they didn't have much say in what tools they could use. And I wouldn't see how they would be able to plug this in. So you'd have to sell it at the level of whoever's making decisions. But like maybe in small business, yeah, I don't know. I think we just have to lay out the market, like who to target.
As a closing story, I think your point brings up a key lesson that I learned the hard way in HR tech. So back in 2011, 2012, I was running a HR tech company, and we were basically selling 360-degree assessment software and things like that. Initially, I thought, like, of course, my target segment is HR leads and HR managers and people who want to get this done. After like busting my head against a wall for like 18 months or so, I realized that was the wrong segment. Like you said, the HR lead does not have a discretionary budget to spend. They're given a set budget in larger companies that you are able to spend this. So that when they want to add a software for $50,000 a year, well, guess what? You've got to like get approvals from people. And in this scenario, I learned like, sales is for sure the thing that does it. And I think like in this scenario as well, like you said, customer service is not empowered to make these sort of like calls. Like they would have their help desk tool and ticketing software, and that would be it. But I would go to maybe head of customer service and not customer success, sales, or anything. And I would say like, if you bump up your customer service, output reactions by this much, this is what the bottom line results would be. And perhaps I would take that angle to enter that. And it's a good point that you made and made me think about like a really important lesson that I learned back in the day. So yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen tech will often have a say in these tools. So like, I know when I was in product, like I was often, they would use a tool, but we would oversee it. We would integrate it. And therefore, like it was important to sell us as well. Some organizations can be like that.
All right, cool. That's a wrap. This was a fun episode. I liked our initial sort of like chat just about the world and the game. Like perhaps could be something that we could regularly sort of like do, because I think like jumping straight into ideas, I think there's a lot of mindset shift change that requires to someone who might be listening to this, but is currently in their job, doesn't know how to make that switch. And that could be areas that we could give a little more, not advice, but our thoughts on what we've seen work. And perhaps some of that resonates with them and helps them make that transition a little easier.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want one quick anecdote before we end. I have this one friend. I feel like he needs to make that transition because he's a smart guy, but he's always just hustling. Like he's got a job and then he wants to make some more cash on the side. But he's only interested in doing jobs for money on the side. Like, why don't you learn how to create your own business? That's something that can scale and you're not just under someone's thumb. And he just can't make that mental shift. For him, like if he works on something, he wants to directly get paid the minute he works. And I think some people just have that. And like they need to get out of that. Like, no, actually, this stuff is something that, yeah, it's hard at the beginning, but it compounds.
And it's like delayed gratification, right? So in a world that you're living in, which is all instant gratification, you go, you clock in, you get out. Like one of my other nephews started working at one of these salary advance companies, not like payday sort of like advance companies, but these are companies where, and it's becoming very big, especially hourly workers, they get paid bi-weekly or weekly or whatever the cycle is. But let's say that, you worked for 4 days in the week, 8 hours, 32 hours. Let's say that you're making $10 an hour. So you have 320 degrees worth of wages that need to be paid for you. So what these companies now do is they partner up with these software companies, load up the account with X amount of money, and then employees can call money in advance. But when I zoom out based on what you just said, it just reinforces that sort of like very, I just need to work, get paid, work, get paid. And frankly, it's a really addictive cycle once you get onto it, because anything that you're going to do that we just talked about is going to take weeks, months to get off the ground, to get talking to customers and maybe making some money if you're lucky. And I just don't, like you said, people are just not wired for it because we've just killed our receptors and are addicted to dopamine hits. And in this case, the dopamine is coming from whenever you get paid. All right, cool. That's a wrap. Enjoy your holiday. And I look forward to speaking to you when you are back.
Yep. Thanks.